the flint snaps wrong. Not along the prepared platform, not the clean Levallois fracture you planned, but diagonally, jagged, useless. You curse. In whatever language cursing took 40,000 years ago, you curse. Then you pick up another core and start again. Because the alternative is dying with a dull edge in your hand. That's where we start. Not in a museum. Not in front of a diorama with fiber optic lighting and a placard written by someone who has never slept on frozen ground. We start in the mess, the smell, the absolute grinding physicality of staying alive in Pleistocene Europe, where the cold doesn't just bite. It makes a decision about whether you deserve to continue existing. I've been dragging myself through the archaeological record for 31 years. I've crawled through limestone caves in the Dordogne with a headlamp that kept dying. I've sifted sediment in Croatia until my fingers cracked and bled. And the single most persistent myth I've had to fight, in lecture halls, in journal peer reviews, in arguments with colleagues over bad wine, is that Neanderthals were dirty, primitive, malodorous brutes who stumbled through life without reflection or care. They were not, and I'm going to prove it to you the hard way. Let's talk about what a Neanderthal body actually smelled like, because nobody ever does, and it matters. First, sweat. Same apocrine and eccrine glands we carry. Same basic chemistry. 40,000 years ago, there was no deodorant, obviously, but there was also no processed sugar rotting through their gut microbiome. No synthetic fabrics trapping heat against skin. No sedentary fat layer built from 8 hours at a desk. These were lean, extraordinarily muscular individuals, more robust than any Olympic athlete alive today, who moved constantly, ate fresh kill, and whose sweat would have smelled sharp and animal and real, but not fetid, not rotten. Well, that distinction is important. The rot came from other places, and here is where I need you to understand what their mouths were like. The dental calculus. God, the calculus. When researchers at the Max Planck Institute analyzed the hardened plaque from Neanderthal teeth at sites like El Cedron in Spain and Spy in Belgium, they didn't find evidence of negligence. They found a pharmacopoeia. The calculus from the El Cedron individuals, dated to roughly 50,000 years ago, contained poplar bark, which produces salicylic acid, the active compound in aspirin.
Feel the fracture.
One individual showed extensive dental abscesses, the kind of infection that produces a constant, low, nauseating throb in the jaw that you cannot ignore. And yet embedded in that same individual's calculus was evidence of consuming penicillium mold, naturally occurring, deliberately sought, my gut says, because the fossils don't tell us the intention, but they tell us the pattern. Sick individual. A known antimicrobial substance. Repeated presence. That's not luck. That's knowledge. But here's what the academic papers skip over because they're written by people in temperature-controlled offices. What it feels like to have a tooth abscess in a cave. No antibiotics, no extraction. The infection pools in the jaw, pressure building under bone, and some nights the pain is so absolute it colonizes your entire skull. You can't sleep. You can't focus. And yet the individual at El Cedron was healing. Someone knew what to give them. Someone prepared it. This is grooming. This is healthcare. Just not the kind that comes in a white plastic bottle. Standard archaeology claims that behavioral modernity, the capacity for symbolic thought, planning, complex social organization, arrived with Homo sapiens around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago in what we call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. But if you've spent time with the Châtel-Perronian industry, the tool assemblage that Neanderthals were producing in France and Spain right at the boundary period, you start to feel a deep discomfort with that timeline. Perforated animal teeth? Pigment use? Structured living spaces where different activities happened in different zones. The fossil record doesn't give us motivations, but it gives us behaviors. And those behaviors suggest people who understood that some spaces were for processing meat and other spaces were for sleeping, and you didn't mix the two if you could help it. That separation was hygiene. Crude by our standards. Absolutely functional by any standard that matters. Let me introduce you to someone. I'll call her the Elder, though she was probably not old by our metrics. Maybe 35, which in the Pleistocene meant she had survived things that would end most of us. Her femur tells her story. A catastrophic fracture, mid-shaft, the bone displaced and then, impossibly, healed.
We're here for you.
Completely healed, with callus formation that took months to develop. You cannot heal a mid-shaft femur fracture in a mobile hunter-gatherer society unless someone is bringing you food, keeping you warm, managing your waste so infection doesn't spread. The Elder survived because her group carried her. Literally. There are at least a dozen such cases in the Neanderthal record. Healed injuries so severe that survival required sustained, dedicated care from others. Think about what that care required. Someone was cleaning her wounds. Someone was removing her waste from the sleeping area. Someone was managing the smell, the mess, the biological chaos of a severely injured body. Not because a rule said so, but because leaving it meant predators, meant flies, meant sepsis crawling through an open wound. Hygiene in this world wasn't about self-image. It was about whether the group survived the night. Now, the water question, because everyone always asks about the water question. Neanderthals did not have running water. They didn't have soap, at least not in any form we'd recognize. Though some researchers have speculated that fat combined with wood ash, which produces a crude saponification reaction, was probably stumbled upon repeatedly throughout human prehistory. What they had was access to streams, rivers, and seasonal meltwater. They had rain, and they had the universal mammalian instinct to remove substances from the skin that cause irritation or attract predators. Every large game hunter in the ethnographic record, and I use this as analogy, not equation, develops systematic methods for removing blood, fat, and viscera after a kill. Not for aesthetics, because dried blood cracks skin and opens pathways for infection. Because the smell of rotten meat on a human body is a predator advertisement. Cave lions were real. Cave hyenas were real. Smelling like a carcass in Pleistocene Europe was not a lifestyle. It was a death notification. The Neanderthals at Maastricht Belvedere in the Netherlands were living near open water sources repeatedly over thousands of years. Shanidar Cave in Iraq, where the famous flower burial may or may not represent intentional grave goods. The jury has been arguing for decades, and I've argued on both sides depending on how strong my coffee was. Sits near a perennial stream. Site selection was not random. Water proximity was a survival variable, and water proximity enabled washing. Did they wash systematically, daily, ritually? The fossils don't tell us everything, but my gut says it was opportunistic and practical. A kill means blood on skin and clothing. The scraped and cured hides they wrap themselves in. Blood dries and stiffens hide. A stiff hide is a cold hide. You wash the hide not because you care about cleanliness in the abstract, but because a supple hide means surviving a night at -15. Let's talk about the hides for a moment, because this is another place where the brute narrative falls apart. The Neanderthal lithic toolkit included scrapers, carefully made, specifically shaped stone tools designed to remove fat and membrane from the inside surface of an animal's skin. The scraper assemblages from sites across Europe show consistent, repeated use patterns, edge rounding consistent with hide working, residue evidence of animal fat and hair. You don't make a specialized tool for a task you perform once or accidentally. The presence of purpose-made scrapers in virtually every Neanderthal assemblage from Western Europe to the Levant tells you that hide preparation was a sustained, skilled, socially transmitted technology. Preparing a hide is wet work. You need to keep the skin moist during scraping or it becomes brittle. You work with wet hands. You are functionally in regular contact with water and in regular contact with the principles of removing organic material from a surface. That knowledge does not stay contained to hide working. It leaches into daily practice. And the children. God, I keep coming back to the children because they make this undeniable. At La Ferracie in France, Neanderthal burials include at least 2 infants. At Roque de Marsal, a Neanderthal child of perhaps 2 to 3 years old was deliberately placed in a pit. Children this young, in a survival environment this harsh, required intensive physical care. Nursing, warmth management, cleaning. A 2-year-old cannot clean themselves. Someone did it for them. Someone removed waste, managed skin conditions, kept the child's airways clear of the mucus that a damp cave winter produces in quantity. I have a vivid and unglamorous imagination about what that actually involved. And none of it sounds like the behavior of animals incapable of hygiene. There's a researcher, I won't name names because we've had public disagreements that got unpleasant, who argued in print that Neanderthal body lice evidence proves they were dirty. I want to address this with the patience it deserves, which is limited. Lice are a social parasite. They transmit through close physical contact. Their presence in a population means sustained physical intimacy. Grooming, sleeping together for warmth, shared clothing and bedding. Every highly social primate on Earth carries lice. The presence of lice in the Neanderthal record doesn't indicate poor hygiene. It indicates community. It indicates the kind of close physical bond that keeps a species warm enough to survive glacial winters. Lice are evidence of togetherness, not filth. Now, the counter-argument I know is forming in your head. Homo sapiens eventually replaced them. If Neanderthals were so capable, so cognitively sophisticated, so socially complex, why are they gone? It's the question that every defender of Neanderthal intelligence eventually has to answer, and I'm not going to dodge it. The Schöningen spears, 8 throwing spears carved from spruce wood, recovered in Germany and dated to roughly 300,000 years ago. Associated with Homo heidelbergensis, but representing the technological lineage from which Neanderthal woodworking descended, are among the most aerodynamically sophisticated projectile weapons from the entire Pleistocene. The bone tools from Aubry-Peyroney in France, shaped from deer ribs into lissoirs. Leather working tools that produce a smooth, burnished hide surface are indistinguishable in function from tools used by European craftspeople thousands of years later. These are not the tools of a species unable to plan, adapt, or innovate. What Neanderthals may not have had, or had in smaller concentrations, was the particular kind of social networking that allowed information to move rapidly across large geographic distances. Their groups were smaller. Their interaction networks were tighter. When a climate catastrophe hit a population of 200 people in a valley, there was no distant cousin group sending aid or new techniques. See, the knowledge died with the group. Homo sapiens, with their longer-range social connections and their apparent capacity for larger symbolic communication networks, were more resilient to the specific catastrophic pressures of the late Pleistocene. That's not intelligence. That's not hygiene. That's not brutishness. That's network topology. And it haunts me because it means Neanderthals may have lost the evolutionary lottery, not because they were less, but because they were fewer and unlucky. Here's where I stop being a scientist and become something closer to a mourner. Somewhere between 2 and 4% of the DNA in your body, if you are of non-African descent, is Neanderthal. It's not metaphor. It's not poetry. It is literal genetic material passed through an unbroken chain of bodies from a cold cave in Europe or the Levant to whatever warm room you're sitting in right now. Some of that DNA encodes immune response variants that helped your ancestors survive the pathogen environments of Europe and Asia. Some of it has been linked to pain sensitivity, to blood coagulation rates, to the particular way your body responds to cold. They are not gone.
Hold still.
They are distributed.
This will help.
And when I think about that elder with her healed femur, the person who chewed poplar bark into a poultice and pressed it against a friend's swollen jaw, the one who scraped hide at the cave mouth in October light that was already going cold and thin. I feel something that the academic literature doesn't have a vocabulary for. They washed their hands, not because a poster in a bathroom told them to, because they understood at some wordless, bone-deep level that the world was trying to kill them, and cleanliness was a small, daily refusal to let it. They groomed each other against the lice. They buried their children. They had toothaches that woke them at 3 in the morning in a cave that smelled like smoke and wet dog and the faint copper of old blood. They were not clean by our standards. Nothing about their world was. But they fought the dirt with everything they had.
Thank you.
With knowledge, with care, with each other. That 2% is the fossil they left inside us. It doesn't speak. But sometimes, when you're sick and someone brings you something warm without being asked, when you feel the specific human comfort of being tended to, that impulse came from somewhere older than language. It came from them.